Hey, what's going on, everybody? Manny here once again. Welcome to DFS Zone, your source for daily fantasy sport lineup advice for the NFL and NBA. I got a brand new video for you guys. I figure I'll touch upon how to go about game stacks. So I'm going to discuss with you some of the little tips, some of the little strategies, some of the things that I look for. Not going to give you everything because it'll be a lengthy video. Nobody really wants to see a 25-30 minute video, but I'm going to try to make it as short and try to give you some good guidance. And this is more so for those who are very new to NFL DFS or DFS in general, because the same applies with game stacking on MLB, NBA, WNBA, and NHL. So you can go either or. You definitely should incorporate game stacking as a strategy. But before I get started with the video, I appreciate you guys drop a like. And if you're new to the channel and have not as of yet subscribed to the channel, and you want to be able to get your NFL and NBA content on a regular basis all the way through the NFL and NBA season with live shows. I have a live show that I conduct for the NFL every Saturday night at 7 p.m. right here at DFS Zone on YouTube, and that is actually tomorrow. So definitely come on in and join the community so that we can discuss tomorrow's Sunday slate. And on top of that, I'll be running 4 live shows, at least minimum 4 live shows a week for the NBA season, all throughout the NBA season, 1 hour before lock. So definitely subscribe down below, put on your post notifications. This way you don't miss out on any of those new videos as well as live shows. All right, game stacking. This is my take on game stacking. People have all kind of methods. I don't know what people do. I know for me over the years, as far as game stacking for any team sport, and we're discussing NFL here, the first thing you have to do, and these are little things that you should be looking for. First things first, go to the Vegas odds for Vegas lines and look to see what the implied totals are every single slate of every week, and determine the next step is determine what are the highest implied totals for the week. Now, granted, I'm going to make this very, very clear. Listen carefully. Not all implied totals, high implied totals, are created equal, because there are going to be some slates and some implied totals that are going to favor one team over the other, like a 10 or 14 point spread. Whereas, let's say for instance, you have an implied total of 50 and a team is favored by 10, then you're going to have one team favored to put up 30 points and the other one 20. Okay, and me personally, I do not gauge implied totals on that. I like high implied totals, but I like games that are at least the matchups seem to be good, and I like the spreads to be 5 points or lower. I typically gauge it that way. There might be once in a while may consider a game in a slate that has a 6 or 7 point spread, but only if really deep down inside I believe that Vegas might be a little off, and I think that the opponent who is underdog by 6 or 7 points really truly has an opportunity to not only cover the spread but possibly even win the game. Then if I feel truly that that is the best way to go, I will consider that game as a possible game slate that week. But other than that, my preference is 1 to 5 point spreads, because what I enjoy, like for instance this week, one of the games that I'm going to talk about is the Minnesota-Philadelphia game. I have my eye. I'm going to have some exposure to it, more so in the 4 o'clock slate, because I love playing games with with good implied totals, not simply just high, but good implied totals or high, which both sides are going to be they're going to be within 4 or 5 points or less. But I love them in smaller slates than as opposed to these large slates. And the large slate, you have so much variety. You got so many players that you can actually play. But let me not get off course here. So when you think about implied totals, I prefer 1 to 5 points. And going back to the Minnesota game with Philadelphia, that game is now the implied totals in that game right now at the moment are 46.5, Philadelphia favored by 3. And 3 points can go either way, Minnesota. That means this game is going to be close enough. And what I think about it with this game is right away I look at, okay, who are the participants in this game and where there's an advantage. So and then I go and I look at team defense versus team offense. I break down quarterbacks versus defense, position players versus defense, and then I narrow it down. I look at fantasy points, and I calculate all that, and I get at least an idea. But this game here, simply, when you're thinking about this game, you're thinking of Minnesota, you're thinking Cousins, you're thinking automatically his dynamic duels on the side of Adam Thielen and the wideout Mr. Diggs. And you got to think also part of that offense, as far as passing is concerned, is Mr. Kyle Rudolph, the tight end. Then when you think of Philadelphia, you say, hey, you know what? They got some weapons too offensively, especially passing. You got Mr. Wentz. You got his favorite target, Zach Ertz, who happens to be a tight end. And then you have his boy Jeffrey on the wing. And you can consider maybe Aguilar as well. So he's got some weapons that he can move the football with. So now you say to yourself, well, if I'm going to gauge this game, because it is a point spread of 3 and only a 46 point total, there's a possibility this game and all these key players are going to have integral plays or integral parts in this game throughout the entire game. And you'll be lucky if the game stays this close, then maybe it may even go into overtime. And now you got an opportunity to gain even more fantasy points within that one game. So that's a game that I typically will target simply because there is opportunity among the offenses, especially after you look at defense and offense. Let's just talk about this game real quickly. Total defense, Minnesota 19th, Philadelphia 11th. Rushing defense, Minnesota's 14th with 104 yards a game given up to oppositions with 2 TDs. Philadelphia is first in the league right now. They're still holding oppositions in the rush game to 63.8 yards per game and only 2 touchdowns. But here's where the difference is at. Pass defense. Both teams, as we know, probably better off passing than running. Their running games are not superior on either side of the ball. I think they are definitely more pass-oriented teams, especially Minnesota for sure. So Minnesota, you got pass defense. They're 21st, giving up 278 yards per game and 8 touchdowns. And then you have Philadelphia 17th, giving up 272 yards per game and 7 TDs. They're pretty much balanced there. 7 TDs to 8, 17th and 21st, and only 6 yards separate the 2 teams. So they're really right there neck and neck. I consider that even. But pass offense, now you look to see how the offenses are as far as in the league right now. And we know Minnesota is going to be up there in the top. They are the 6th best pass offense in the NFL right now with 327 yards per game passing and 10 touchdowns. And then we look at the other side of the ball. We look at Philadelphia. They are 18th in the league, so they're about 12 positions lower and only putting up 246 yards per game with 4 touchdowns. But again, they just got Carson Wentz back now over the last 2 games. So I feel that's going to change as time goes on. But I really, again, you got to gauge this game. You got to love Minnesota, which I talked about some of the Minnesota players this week in my videos because I am targeting some of them. But Philadelphia in this game, this is going to be a fairly close game, and I love everything about it. And then when I look at it a little bit deeper, not to get too far into it, but quarterbacks versus quarterbacks, the opposition, Minnesota, 23.8 fantasy points per game. Philadelphia, 21.5 fantasy points per game. So pretty close there. Running backs, 17.3 points per game given up to running backs by Minnesota. Philadelphia, 13 fantasy points per game, which is the 2nd lowest. So Philadelphia is showing that they are at least keeping running backs down. But again, they haven't faced a whole ton of good running backs during the course of this season. And not to say Minnesota has, I mean, because Dalvin Cook hasn't been able to play, and Latavius Murray is not. Latavius Murray was never really that good, but he's not the same player he was a few years ago. Wide receiver is where it gets really interesting. Minnesota is giving up 33.2 fantasy points per game to the opposition at receiver. Philadelphia, 37.6 fantasy points per game, and that's where I say, hey, they're fairly close. Philadelphia is giving up 4 fantasy points more a game, but this is an area we're looking at 37 fantasy points compared to 17 and 23 in the previous other positions. You definitely got to consider quarterback, throwing over to the wide receivers, and really attacking this actual game with each team's wide receivers. Tight end is really, surprisingly, both teams have probably 2 of the top maybe 6 tight ends, I think, in this league, with Kyle Rudolph on one end and Zach Ertz on the other. I would favor Zach Ertz more in this matchup because he is a big part of Philadelphia's offense on a regular basis. So that's why I lean on Ertz, and I mentioned him in the tight end video that I kind of like him as the high price stud out of the tight ends this week over Travis Kelce. But overall, as far as total fantasy points, 79.1 fantasy points per game given up by Philadelphia through the 4 positions, and Minnesota 84. So these are some of the things that I gauge when I try to make these decisions on game stacks. Then again, you got to look at injuries, you got to look at matchups. Receiver going up if he's going up against a solid top tier cornerback. all that comes into play as well. But I could be here forever talking about it and deciding on it. I just wanted to give you guys at least an idea of how it works. So this is one game that I'm definitely targeting. Another two, I have two more games that I definitely think that everybody should target. Same scenario. I'm not going to go through all the numbers. It's just a quick video. It's just to basically tell you what areas what teams or what games we can target. Oakland and the Charger game is definitely a game I am targeting. I love the game. It's definitely a game that I'm going to target in the main slate. I'm not going to overdo it with as far as all the players. Another thing that I want to mention regarding targeting game stacks. I am all in favor for game stacks being a game stack if you're taking 4 to 6 players out of that actual game. If you're looking to get 2 or 3 players from one game, if you're looking to do a 3-1 stack with 1 player for one team and 3 in the other, that's pretty much not really a good game stack, at least in my opinion, for any game, especially if it's a high implied game that is under 5-point spread. Absolutely should be looking at 4 to 6 players. So I usually target 2 and 2, or I go 5 in a game stack and favor three players to 2 for each team, or I go 3-3. And I think that's the right way to go. You know, in a game like this one between Oakland and the LA Chargers, you could definitely get 5 players in this game. Go 3-2 Oakland. Then make sure, and I said this before on my videos, flip the script. I've been burned several times over the years. I put myself in position to do 2 or 3 lineups, gauging on, let's say, for instance, Oakland's, let's say, Derek Carr with Jared Cook and maybe Jordy Nelson or Cooper, taking a, make a correlation between those 3 guys. And then you only take the 2 San Diego guys that I really like maybe Keenan Allen with Melvin Gordon. But then I should do another lineup and make sure if I'm doing multiple lineups, you definitely should flip it around and definitely give that correlation to the Chargers as well. Just in case Derek Carr and company backfires, you have a lineup that is all now more gauged, or let's say Carr doesn't play that well, but nonetheless he gets a couple passes off to Cooper or to Nelson or Jared Cook, and you have those guys in your lineup and they happen to make the big play and get a couple of touchdowns on some minimal receptions. But Mr. Derek Carr did not perform well. In the meantime, his opponent, you didn't choose him at all in any of your lineups. You gauged up 3 lineups and you basically decided to go with just Derek Carr all the way. Didn't give no thought at all on Phillip Rivers, and he happens to have the better game. So trust me on this. If you're going to do multiple lineups, definitely consider doing that. Definitely turn it around, flip it. And it goes for the same for NBA stacking and Major League Baseball stacking. Trust me, it does work. It's probably better off. It's just a way for you to cover. But I don't want to do any cursing or anything like that, or saying anything that it's not, it's not right to say. But nonetheless, you know what I'm coming from. You got to cover your butt, and that is the best way to go about it. It really is. Other than that, what else I can tell you about game stacking? Obviously, if you have a couple now this week, plain and simple. I mean, this week we have about 4 or 5 games that are high implied totals, are really high. I mean, 58 for the game that I'm going to discuss. Pittsburgh, Atlanta, 58, which is the next game that I think we should definitely stack. That's enormous. That's a college football, that's a really high number. 58, you get those in college games, man. I mean, this is a big number. Definitely a great game to target. I don't like the factors that I have to target it a little bit in the main slate, because I mean, there's so many opportunities, so many other plays you can have. But you can have one lineup you can do and gauge it on at least 4 or 5 of these players. You don't have to really stack them with 6, but you could do 5 easily in this, and you could definitely do 4. But Atlanta, Pittsburgh is another game. Now, granted, I already gave you Minnesota. I'm definitely on that game. And that game is definitely, I'm targeting more as the 4 o'clock slate and even the express slate. But in the main slate, Oakland, the Chargers, and Atlanta, Pittsburgh are definitely probably the best 2 that I really like. And, I mean, this game here, man, total defense, Atlanta, 29th. I'm going to go over the numbers on this one because they're really impressive. Pittsburgh, 31st in total defense. They are 30th in pass defense, rushing defense, pass defense, and 26th in rushing defense. On the other side of the ball, Atlanta, 29th in total defense, 26th in pass defense, and 23rd in rushing defense. Now, let's look at the rushing for a moment, because you right away you already see that you definitely can attack this game on both sides of the ball, passing the ball. We know it's going to be a pass-oriented game, but Atlanta does have a little bit of definitely an advantage in this game with the running back position because they're getting Freeman back, and Freeman is not a bad running back, and he is just he's totally healthy. So you got Freeman in there with TC with Tevin Coleman, and then on the other side you really only got James Conner. And to be honest, haven't been that impressed with the way they've been utilizing James Conner, especially in the last 2 games. He's just not getting enough touches. Granted, I guess, they had to really fling the ball a little bit more because they fell behind in some games. But even if they fall behind this game, they got to try to utilize this kid, even if it's out of the backfield, getting some catches off the backfield. But I think that the advantage is definitely here for Atlanta. I really truly believe Atlanta was underdog by 3 points in this game. Have a good shot to not only play well in this game and score a lot of points, but possibly even win this game. And Pittsburgh can't afford to lose the game. I mean, they'll fall to 1-3, and they're going to definitely be they're really going to be in a tough situation to really get back in the division with the way the Ravens are playing, and as well as Cincinnati. And I believe both of those teams are going to win on Sunday as well, and they're going to be 4-1, tied for first. But breaking down the numbers a little bit more, rushing. So when you look at the pass defense, passing offense-wise, Atlanta is 6th best in the league. We know that both teams' offenses are going to score. And when you look at the total pass offense, you see it. Atlanta is 6th in the league, scoring 315 yards per game and 12 touchdowns. And then you look at Pittsburgh, they're 3rd best in the league, 339 yards per game and 8 touchdowns. So they both are scoring. They're both getting out of tons of yardage. So you could expect a big game from Matt Ryan as well as Ben Roethlisberger. And both teams suffer in defending the pass. So this game is going to be a shootout. And then you have here, it comes down to the fantasy points. I'm not going to break down everything first downs and the whole 9 yard because I can go through the whole thing. If anybody's been with me long enough, I break down everything. But at quarterback, 26.1 fantasy points per game for Atlanta. Pittsburgh has been coughing up 28.9 fantasy points per game to the opponent's quarterbacks. Then at running back, there is an advantage for Pittsburgh. They actually are defending better against the running backs thus far this year, only coughing up 14.5 fantasy points per game. But then again, they really haven't had a tandem like T. Coleman and Devontae Freeman, which are pretty explosive when they work with each other. While Pittsburgh has only faced Cleveland, Kansas City with Kareem Hunt, the Buccaneers, and the Ravens. And the Ravens obviously have a a nice tandem of players there with Collins and with Mr. Allen. But I don't think not in the same league as Devontae Freeman, in my opinion, and T. Coleman as a tandem. So I think those numbers are going to, there's an opportunity there. But Atlanta definitely has had vulnerability to the running backs, and we know that. They have trouble with the dual threat backs. This is where they got to try to utilize James Conner. I don't know if they will. But 29.1 fantasy points per game to running backs, while I said Pittsburgh 14.5. That's a big, big difference. But the wide receivers is the big one, man. 36.2 fantasy points per game given up by Atlanta, and Pittsburgh has been giving up a whopping 39.4 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. This is where Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, Ridley, you name it, Switzer, all these guys are all going to get busy here, including Vance McDonald and maybe Mr. Hopper. So it's a lot. I mean, I'm telling you, those numbers are huge. Against tight ends, they've done fairly well. Atlanta has only given up 8.7 fantasy points per game. Surprisingly, Pittsburgh has given up probably second most in the NFL, 16.7 fantasy points per game to tight ends. I don't think they're going to worry too much about Austin Hooper here for Atlanta. But again, total fantasy points. You can do a very nice lineup with 4 or 5 plays right here if you choose to, because Atlanta's the 4 positions, a total of 101 fantasy points per game on average to the opponent, and Pittsburgh 99.5. And again, when you're thinking fantasy points in a tournament like this, main event, in football, you always want to try to shoot for 200. That's the key number. In basketball, is the 300 club. In football, I call it a 200 club. In baseball, I would say minimum 170 or better will get you good cash in a GPP, in a tournament. If you want to do well in a tournament, 170s in MLB, definitely 200 or better in football. And with the high implied totals in about 4 or 5 games this week, this is going to be a high fantasy point total week, unless we have some major injuries or some serious good defensive schemes that shut down a lot of these offenses this week. I expect whoever's going to win is probably going to have about 240, 250 points. I wouldn't even be surprised even more than that total in their actual lineup to win the GPP. But To win on a regular basis consistently, you're definitely aiming for about 200 points. 180, 190 would definitely get you some low cash. I mean, from the experience I've had over the last 3 years playing fantasy football, DFS, NFL here on Fanduel and on Draftkings, that's about the number you're looking for. In basketball is 300, just to give you guys some numbers. But that's where I'm at, man. I think these are the 3 games that everybody should be gearing at, and those are some of the strategies I use as far as making decisions on game stacks. And I prefer game stacking on smaller slates. On a large slate, you really have so many options that you don't necessarily have to go that route. But again, it does work. You can utilize it. You could do something like a game stack with Atlanta and Pittsburgh on Sunday. And then basically another way to go is game stack between 2 of the highest implied total games. I've done that and had some success with that throughout the years. It works. I like it better more so in a 4-game slate or something smaller like that, like the afternoon, the 4 o'clock slate, or the Express, or maybe just a 2-game slate like the Express, or the Sunday Monday, or the Monday Thursday. You could go that route. But basically that's where I'm at. That's what I think. So again, guys, Oakland, Los Angeles, the targets there: Oakland, Derek Carr, Marshawn Lynch, definitely Cooper, Nelson, and Jared Cook. They got about 5 guys you can target there. I would say definitely look for 2, get some correlation, maybe even 3. If you go with the Chargers as a stack, as a team stack, then you definitely got to consider Rivers. You got to consider, obviously, Mr. Melvin Gordon, and then you got to definitely look at either Keenan Allen or Mr. Mike Williams or Tyrell Williams, one of those guys there, probably either Mike or Keenan Allen. When we're looking at the Atlanta-Pittsburgh game, man, so many opportunities there. Atlanta, you got, of course, Matt Ryan. You're definitely going to have some correlation. Definitely throw in there maybe Mr. Freeman or Mr. TC, and then you have to get one of those receivers in there, either Ridley at a cheaper price or go straight through to the top dog, Julio Jones. And then when it comes to Pittsburgh, you got Antonio Brown, you got Juju, you got the other guy that's really cheap, Swisher, and then you got, of course, James Conner, Vance McDonald at the tight end spot. I really like him in that matchup on Sunday. And then, of course, Big Ben Roethlisberger. So really some nice plays there. And then, of course, Philadelphia with Minnesota. I like Kirk Cousins, as you guys know from my videos. Kirk Cousins this week, you could definitely have some correlation with him with Kyle Rudolph. I think he's in play. I obviously like Zach Ertz more as a tight end if I'm going to go game stack this game, which I will. And then as far as the receivers are concerned, you got to think Thielen and you got to think Diggs within that lineup. If you want to go really cheap, you can go for Robinson, who had 2 catches and 2 receptions for 2 touchdowns, which was a surprise play. Anybody who played them obviously did well that night. And then if not, you could go with Treadwell, the other speedster, the rookie. And then on the other side of the ball, Philadelphia, obviously Ertz, Aguilar, and of course you still have Jordan Matthews over there for Philadelphia, but obviously the main target there will be Ashton, Mr. Jeffrey. Okay, and that's basically where I'm at, guys. So look at those games. If you have any questions regarding game stacks, I can give you more detail. You can hit me up, DM me straight directly, or reach out to me. Remember, we got a Facebook group. We do have a Facebook page, DFS Zone. I have an Instagram, of course, the Twitter. All that is in the description box below. Again, hopefully this is helpful. I basically wanted to do something quickly. I don't know how long I've been on here, but I feel like I've been here for too long. Give too much information, but at the same time, I wanted to give something out there as far as game stats are concerned, and also what are the games that I'm targeting and more or less how I go about it. So those are some of the things that I do. Obviously, there's a lot more detail than that, more other things that I actually look for. But if you want to know any more and you want to pick my brain about it, we could talk about it, through some comments down below or anything like that. If you're interested in any other games, there are a couple other games that I am thinking of gauging more than 2 or 3 players from. But I love these 3 games right here, and I think the 2 highest implied total games are probably the best ones to really target if you wanted to do some game stacks. All right. Other than that, man, drop a like on the video, subscribe down below if you haven't done so already, and of course, put on your post notifications. This way, you do not miss any of my new NFL videos, NBA videos, any live shows for NFL as well as NBA throughout the NBA and NFL season. All right. With that, I bid you a Friday night. Have a good night. I'll see you guys on the next video.